Hey boys, it's Harmnan. Today we're going to be going over the top 10 military vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now for a vehicle to count as a military vehicle, it has to be armed and it has to be armored, so everything on this list is going to be, well, both of those things combined. I just want to preface this video by saying a lot of these vehicles are not really in their particular order as far as other things go. Like the most armored vehicle on this list is not actually going to be at number 1. It's going to sort of be military vehicles ranked in their order from the least useful to the most useful. And they're all armored and they all have guns. Anyway guys, let's get into it. We're gonna start off with number 10. Alright guys, at number 10 we of course have the Chernobog. The Chernobog is, well, for all intents and purposes, pretty useless, to be honest. It's really not that great of a vehicle. However, it is a really cool vehicle. I mean, just look at this thing. Look at the livery that's on it. Like, this thing just screams like Russian missile launcher. Like, it's just sick. It's just a cool vehicle. Now, it's definitely not the fastest vehicle ever. It's definitely not the most useful vehicle ever. This thing does have some pretty unique features though. When you are in the driver's seat, you have the ability to allow the vehicle to actually shoot the missiles. On keyboard, you hold H, and basically that puts down the supports, which lift the vehicle off the ground slightly in order to give it the support that it needs to actually extend the missile launcher. This is actually the longest lock-on missile launcher in the entire game. So you can lock on to aircraft or ground vehicles from the absolute furthest distance in the entire game using this thing. It does also spam fire 5 rockets very quickly, which is pretty cool. Now this thing was kind of designed to be a air defense tool in GTA. However, I don't really think anyone actually uses it for that because, well, it's just not the best. Now the missiles on this thing do actually have pretty good tracking and they are actually pretty quick as well. However, they're not really quick enough or good enough to actually be super useful, but it is pretty cool that they have the longest lock-on range in the entire game. So there you have it guys, that's pretty much it for the Chernobog. It's honestly not that great of a vehicle. I would only buy this thing if you have like stupid amounts of excess money. That's why I bought it way back when. Kind of wish that I didn't, but it's fine. I have it now, so Chernobog, number 10. Let's move on to number 9. Alright guys, next up we have the Rhino tank. Now of course the Rhino tank these days in Grand Theft Auto Online is a little bit piss weak and a little bit terrible. But at one point in Grand Theft Auto Online, the Rhino tank was the strongest vehicle in the entire game. If you saw a guy in a Rhino tank, you ran the other way because it was absolutely terrifying. However, not anymore. Now you pretty much run towards him and kill him because it's pretty useless. Depending on who's driving. Like if I'm driving it, then you should run the other way. But if it's most people, like you might as well just run towards them and just get it done. Yeah, so the Rhino tank is pretty piss weak. It's really not that good, but it is a pretty cool military vehicle. I absolutely love the model that Rockstar used for this tank. I think this tank is like super good looking. It is just sick. I just wish that there was maybe an upgrade to actually make the Rhino tank into a personal vehicle like the Khanjali maybe, and put more armor on it to actually make it like kind of viable to use, because if you're going up against a Khanjali in the Rhino tank, you are probably going to lose unless the Khanjali is being driven by a thumbless ape. But honestly, there's a lot of thumbless apes in GTA, but there's not that many. There's not enough to actually lose in a Khanjali to a Rhino. That's just it's just not a good look. However, the Rhino tank does actually have a really good cannon. It's not as good as the Khanjalis, but it's about the same. Unless you get the railgun on the Khanjali, then it's, you know, better again in another way. Overall, the Rhino is just, I think it's underappreciated, man. It's a sick tank. It looks awesome, but it's not the best. Anyway, guys, at number 9, we got the Rhino tank. Let's move on to number 8. Alright guys, next up we have the HVY Menacer at number 8. This thing is alright. It's okay. It's okay. It's not as good as the other vehicles ahead of it on the list, but it is pretty good. Now the Menacer is actually one of the faster armored vehicles in the game, and it's also pretty well armed. The driver gets access to dual machine guns. I think these are the exact same machine guns as the Night Shark if I'm not mistaken. So they're kind of piss weak. But anyway, I mean, other than that, it's pretty good. Now the Menacer actually does seat 5 players, I believe. If not, it's 4, which is it's a pretty good amount. It's pretty average, really. The Menacer Menacer also, of course, has the 50 caliber minigun on the top of it, which is a very, very nice addition to this thing. However, the gunner is very, very exposed on the Menacer in comparison to some of the other vehicles where you get a gun on the top of it, which isn't exactly ideal. You get the hatch behind you to protect you and the gun in front of you, but on the sides you are completely exposed. Now, the other thing with the Menacer is that these windows, well, yeah, they're bullet resistant, but they only take up to 15 shots, and then you're basically just done for, because like you can literally crack the windshield on this thing, and the windshield is pretty large. Like you can kill everybody inside this thing, like really no problem. So as far as protecting the passengers inside of this thing, the Menacer is not very good for that. The Menacer does actually have decent armor when it comes to protecting you against rockets, which is good. However, if you're going up against somebody with a pistol or a machine gun, like they're probably going to shred you, or God forbid you go up against another vehicle with a machine gun, you're going to lose in this thing, I'm afraid. Which is very unfortunate. You could argue that there's other vehicles that are going to be on this list that probably have realistically the same amount of protection. I just feel like the Menacer's not as good. And another thing with the Menacer too, it is not very high off of the ground. As you guys can see, my head level is perfect with the windows, so I can shoot into this thing very easily, whereas say with the Insurgent Pickup Custom, I would have to aim up a little bit, which protects the people inside the vehicle a little bit better. And also, this thing has very, very low ground clearance, so when it comes to off-roading, this thing is not as good as some of the other vehicles on this list. It's very bouncy because the chassis of the vehicle actually hits all the bumps, which not that great for off-roading, really. So anyway, guys, the Menacer is at number 8. It's not that great, but it's okay. That's pretty much all I got to say about this thing. Let's move on to number 7. Alright guys, at number 7 we of course have the APC. Now if you're unfamiliar with the APC, you may be wondering, how are you in the water? Well, the APC is amphibious, which is amazing. However, it's really slow. It's terribly slow in the water, unfortunately. If you don't go into the water with considerable momentum, you are not going to go very quickly through the water. However, you can still go in it, which is a pretty big tactical advantage if you think about it. Although, I don't know when you're really going to use it. Trust me, it's a tactical advantage. Now, the APC is a very interesting vehicle. This thing is semi-well armored. It cannot take nearly as much as the Menacer can, as far as punishment from rockets goes. However, the APC is really cool because it is kind of a soloable vehicle. What I mean by that is if you hold H on keyboard, you can actually get into the passenger seat and start operating the gun. Which honestly, how many vehicles can you really say you can do that in that easily? And it really takes no time at all. Like, I'm back in the driver's seat already. If I want to switch, look at this. I'm back in the gun. Like, it takes no time at all. Back in the driver's seat. You can't be moving while you switch, I don't think, but that's okay. Honestly, this vehicle is pretty solid. Having the ability to go into the water with it and actually be amphibious and also have a cannon on it makes doing water related missions quite easy with this thing. Although there's not many of those, hey, it's still pretty useful. In addition to that, this thing does actually seat 4 players, and the rear 2 players who are sitting in this thing have access to a machine gun that they can fire out of the sides of this thing. So it is actually a pretty well armed vehicle, which is a pretty nice thing, I think. Now, when you're inside this thing as well, you are pretty decently protected. There's a couple little windows here and there on this thing, but it also has these 2 shields on the front windows, and you can put them down somehow. I'm just not sure how you do it, honestly. Of course, it does also have a proximity mine dropper, which I just realized now. I kind of forgot about that, but that's another great feature about this thing. Overall, the APC is just a really solid vehicle, and I feel like it doesn't really get enough appreciation these days in Grand Theft Auto Online. It also has a SAM turret battery that you can equip it with, but it limits the missile count to 50, I believe, so you will have to go and re-up and rearm when you're done shooting those missiles if you do equip the SAM battery. However, this cannon that it has right now has infinite ammo. So the APC, pretty solid military vehicle overall. I think this thing's pretty great. Let me know what you guys think of the APC in the comments down below. Alright guys, next up we of course have the Patriot Mil-Spec. Now this thing was added with the Contract DLC, as I'm sure you guys are aware, and it's honestly a pretty fantastic fantastic vehicle. Now, I gotta say the Patriot Mil-Spec is not my favorite vehicle that came out with the Contract DLC, but it is a really, really good one. Now, this thing does not really have very good handling at all whatsoever, which is probably my biggest complaint with the entire vehicle. However, it does have some pretty decent armor, and it of course does actually have machine guns on the front of it, which you can of course fire. Now, these machine guns are actually pretty darn good. As you guys can see, I'm frying this car alive, except it's taking forever. Oh, okay, well, there we go. Now, the Patriot Mil-Spec can actually take a decent amount of damage too. It can take 12 Oppressor missiles or 6 RPGs to actually kill it. So that's pretty good. It's pretty average, but it's pretty good. On top of that, it does of course also seat 4 players, and of course it also has the ability to equip it with a missile lock-on jammer, making it impossible for Oppressor boys to actually stop you in this thing. Well, not impossible, but they can't use their homing missiles, which, I mean, let's be honest, Oppressor people can't really aim, so, you know, they're probably not going to have much success killing you with this thing, so that is pretty good. Now, the Mil-Spec also has a oil slick mine dropper, which is another pretty useful feature with this thing. Now, the Mil-Spec, like I mentioned before, it kind of handles weirdly, and it's also very, very top heavy, so using it in a situation like you see I am in right now, this thing can flip over on you randomly, like all the time, and it's really, really annoying. It also has bullet resistant glass up to 15 rounds, which is about the same as the HVY Menacer. However, this thing is just a little bit better of a vehicle overall. And of course, something I see people talking about all the time is the fact that you can back people down with this thing. Oh, I just hit one of my APC mines that I dropped. Okay. What I mean by back people down is you can of course back up towards players using the slant back on the Patriot Mil-Spec, so you cannot be shot from behind with this thing. However, it's also very hard to shoot out of this thing. You have to be at like a weird like 3/4 angle to the rear to actually be able to shoot at people, so you got to keep that in mind when you're using this thing. Overall, the Patriot Mil-Spec is a pretty great vehicle. I would highly recommend picking it up. It's not the best vehicle ever, but it is a pretty good one. Anyway guys, I think that's pretty much it for the Patriot Mil-Spec. Let's move on to number 5. Alright guys, next up of course we have the Half-Track. Now the Half-Track is a pretty unique vehicle in this game because the front windshield on this thing is actually completely bulletproof. You can actually not be killed through this thing. I know the glass is breaking right now, but I promise you, from the front, you are completely invincible in this thing. Now through the side windows you can actually be shot out, which is pretty unfortunate, but I mean there's got to be some way to kill you. Now in addition to that, this thing has very, very heavy armor. It actually shares the same armor as the Night Shark and the Insurgent Pickup Custom, which is very, very good. Of course, you can sit 2 players in the cab of it, and of course there is the AA gun on the back of it, which of course somebody can operate. Now I've only got the dual AA gun on mine, but you can of course equip this thing with the quad AA cannon, which is a pretty good weapon system. It destroys pretty hard. Now of course, being that this is actually a half-track, it has very, very good off-road capabilities. This thing actually shreds off-road. Unfortunately, the half-track is one of the slowest vehicles on this list. If not, I think it actually is the slowest vehicle. I literally think the Chernobog is faster than this thing, which is, yeah, less than ideal for sure. So that kind of sucks, honestly. But the Half-Track had to have something to make it not very good because it is so good. This thing can actually absolutely shred people if you use it correctly. You can drop proximity mines with this thing as well, and it's also got the front roller on it, so you can crash into other vehicles and pretty much push them out of the way like very easily. So it's overall a pretty damn good vehicle. I would definitely recommend picking up a Half-Track if you guys don't have one already and you have some spare money lying around. It's a pretty fantastic vehicle. Anyway guys, I think that's pretty much it for number 5. Let's move on to number 4. Alright guys, the next vehicle on the list is of course the HVY Insurgent. The Insurgent is one of my favorite vehicles in the entire game, so I might be a little bit biased putting this thing so high on the list, but it honestly is a phenomenal vehicle. Now the Insurgent is the one vehicle on this list that does not actually have any weapons. However, what it lacks in weaponry, it makes up for in armor and overall ability. Now the Insurgent is pretty unique because it is one of the most armored vehicles that can seat a ton of players. This thing can actually seat 6 people, I believe, and of course protect them all the exact same way. The Insurgent Pickup Custom can actually seat 9 players, but a couple of them will be exposed because they're sitting in the back of the truck. So the Insurgent protects all of its occupants a little bit better. Now, of course, like I said, this thing does not actually have any weaponry, so it really doesn't necessarily belong on this list. However, I would argue that this thing is definitely a military vehicle. And of course, like I said, it is very, very armored. This thing can take an absolute ton of damage before it even starts smoking. I've ran from the cops in the Insurgent probably like 2 hours with a 5-star one time when I was really, really bored, and the thing didn't even start smoking. Which, if you think about that, that is pretty insane. Like, the amount of times you're getting shot by the cops during that span is just ridiculous. And for this thing to actually survive the entire time, that's pretty crazy. Anyway, guys, I'm not going to drone on about the Insurgent too much because there are just better militarized vehicles in the game. So anyway, we're going to move into number 3 right now. Alright guys, at number 3 we of course have the Night Shark. Now the Night Shark is one of the best defensive military vehicles in the entire game. This thing is super armored, and it's also really, really fast. In addition to that, it of course has front mounted machine guns that the driver actually controls. Now I must say that these things are pretty piss weak, but it has them nonetheless. The Night Shark is also the fastest vehicle on this entire list, which is a pretty great defensive feature, I must say. In addition to that, it's also a pretty capable off-roader. Despite having about the same ground clearance as the HVY Menacer, this thing is a much better off-roader. I think that is largely due to just how fast this vehicle is. You can just ascend hills and stuff like that like as fast as you really want, and the Night Shark just doesn't really care. Now you can of course equip this thing with window plating like you see that I have right here, or you can leave it off and have the ability to actually shoot your own weapons or throw sticky bombs out of the vehicle. The Night Shark is a pretty fantastic militarized vehicle in this game. It's one that I would recommend that every new player buys as one of their first vehicles that they get in this game. It's just such a good vehicle. I literally use this thing all the time. Pretty much every single time that I actually hop into Grand Theft Auto Online, I am driving either this or an Insurgent. So if that doesn't tell you how useful this thing is, then I don't know what will. The Night Shark is absolutely awesome, and you guys should definitely buy one if you do not have one already. Anyway guys, that is pretty much it for number 3. Let's move on to number 2. Alright guys, at number 2, you knew it was coming. We have the Khanjali. Now like I mentioned way earlier in the video, the Khanjali is superior to the Rhino tank in every single way. This thing is an absolute offensive powerhouse in Grand Theft Auto Online. This thing absolutely shreds. The driver of this vehicle gets access to the main cannon, which is of course equipable to be a railgun cannon, or you can keep the stock cannon that is very similar to the Rhino tank. However, with the railgun cannon, you can have a charged shot, which allows you to shoot a little bit further than the regular cannon does, which is a pretty nice thing to have, honestly. In addition to that, you also get a proximity mine dropper if you choose to equip it when you're customizing this thing, which is pretty fantastic. So we have the driver handled. Now for the passengers. The main passenger of the vehicle gets access to the 50 caliber turret that you guys can see on top of the main tank turret. That gun itself is very good. You can absolutely shred so many vehicles with that thing. Players stand no chance to it, and honestly, air vehicles are really no match for it either. So the passenger has a really good weapon as well. Now for the other 2 passengers, either of them get access to one of the 2 grenade launchers that are on the top of the turret as well. So if you have a fully 4-man loaded Khanjali, you are going to be pretty much unstoppable unless you are attacked by a Hydra from a very high height, and you can just not aim high enough to actually take them out. However, anything else pretty much, you are going to beat them with the Khanjali, at least for a while. The only issue that the Khanjali really has is that it's honestly not very armored for what it is. However, it does need to have some sort of a downside, because if this thing had armor like the Insurgent does, or like the Night Shark does, it would be a very overpowered vehicle, honestly. Overall, the Khanjali is just a fantastic military vehicle in this game. I'd like to see more vehicles like the Khanjali get added into the game, honestly. Anyway guys, I think that is pretty much it for number 2. Let's move on to the number 1 best militarized vehicle in all of Grand Theft Auto Online. Alright guys, and at number 1 we of course have the Insurgent Pickup Custom. The Insurgent Pickup Custom is by far the best militarized vehicle in the entire game, in my opinion. This thing is an absolute beast. Now, of course, I have heavy armor equipped on this thing, which does make it a little bit harder to kill the people inside. Everyone always tells me in my comments that the window plating does absolutely nothing to help, and I do agree. However, if you do not know that the window plating does nothing, you are probably not going to shoot at the actual window plating, you're going to shoot at the actual windows because you think that the window plating actually does something. Unless, of course, you actually know that it doesn't. Overall, the Insurgent Pickup Custom is a super armored vehicle. It has the same armor as the Night Shark and the Half Track. Now, the reason that I actually like to put heavy armor on this thing is because the gunner gets way better protection when you put heavy armor on. Of course, they have a pretty much fully encased shield around them. The sides of it are not enclosed, unfortunately. If they were, though, it would honestly be really good. Now, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Insurgent Pickup Custom does actually seat 9 players, which is pretty crazy for an armored vehicle that's this good. Now, the Insurgent Pickup Custom is a fantastic off-road vehicle, which is a big help to why this thing is so high on this list. This is definitely the best off-roader out of all of the vehicles on the list. It has the most ground clearance and it soaks up bumps like it's pretty much nothing. Now, the driver of the Insurgent Pickup Custom also does get access to a proximity mine dropper, which is a very nice feature to have if you're getting chased, for sure. In addition to that, the gun is upgradable to a 50 caliber minigun turret rather than just a regular 50 cal turret, which definitely helps to make the gun a little bit more potent, shall we say. Now, the Insurgent Pickup Custom is also extremely fast. I believe this is the second fastest vehicle on the entire list, right next to the Night Shark. The Night Shark is definitely faster than the Insurgent Pickup Custom, but the Insurgent can definitely hold its own, I would say. And of course, the best feature about the Insurgent is that it is an absolute battering ram. If anyone gets in your way, you just hit them and move them out of your way. It's unlike pretty much any other vehicle in the entire game, with its ability to just move everything out of your way without flaw. The Insurgent is absolutely fantastic. I think it is the best militarized vehicle in the entire game. There's definitely going to be some of you guys that are going to disagree with me on that. I'm honestly fine with it because I absolutely love the Insurgent Pickup Custom. Anyway, guys, there you have it. That has been my top 10 best militarized vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. If you guys enjoyed this video, a like is of course appreciated. Dislike if you didn't. Let me know what you thought on my list in the comments down below. I'm interested to see what kind of military vehicles you guys are personally fans of in this game, so drop it down below. Subscribe if you guys are new, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.